If you've been to suburban Auckland, you've likely come across a street like this. One where the road terminates with a circular end attached to it. This type of street is known as a cul-de-sac, or a dead end. But where did cul-de-sacs come from? How did they get so common? And what are the pros and cons of cul-de-sacs? In this video, I'll be answering all of those questions and give my verdict on cul-de-sacs. Before I continue, if you find urban planning topics interesting and you want to be notified for future videos, hit the subscribe button down below. You can also find me on Instagram, link is in the description. So what is a cul-de-sac? A cul-de-sac is a street that is closed off at one end. In other words, there's one way in, one way out. This can be referred to as a dead end as well. Now you might be wondering, cul-de-sac sounds French, and you would be right, as cul-de-sac is French for bottom of a sack. To understand why and when we started building cul-de-sacs, we first need to take a look back at the history of city planning, from ancient times to the modern day. In the early 1900s, Auckland was rapidly changing, as it was beginning to expand its metropolitan area, which saw its tram network open in 1902, and suburban expansion around the tram lines, including areas surrounding Dominion Road, New York Road, Monaco Road, and Mount Eden Road, as middle-class families began to move out of the city centre and to these new suburbs. At the time, many cities around the world, including London, Philadelphia, and even Sydney, had grid patterns at the heart of their CBD, and they still do today, with grid patterns being streets that ran in straight lines from north to south and east to west, giving us squares that are known as blocks, or subdivisions, which I'll explain later. But why were cities building this simplistic grid design? There's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, grid layouts have been around since the ancient times, with the first grid layout being Mohenjo-daro in modern-day Pakistan, nearly 5,000 years ago. The grid would eventually pick up with other ancient civilizations, including China, Egypt, and the Romans. Eventually, William Penn, the founder of the US city of Philadelphia, chose the grid design for the city to represent the values of equality and community. Due to Philadelphia's importance at the time, the grid was spread to other US cities like Chicago and San Francisco. Secondly, grid layouts were very easy to build and subdivide. Before grids, there were many unstructured street patterns like ones in medieval Europe. With a grid pattern, new cities were able to be divided into rectangular or square blocks. The grid also allowed for these subdivisions to be sold, which in turn helped raise cash. This was especially evident in the US during the 19th century. Lastly, a grid layout allowed for cities to grow quickly. Due to its simple, repeatable design, cities were able to grow fast by just repeating the same pattern. An example can be seen in New York City, where many areas of the city, including Manhattan, are covered with the grid pattern. This allowed New York City to grow into what it is today. In Auckland, straight streets improved the flow of west-east and north-south tram routes, which helped shape Auckland's growth in the early 20th century. From Mohenjo-daro to Philadelphia to Auckland, grid patterns have had a long history in urban planning and they remain of importance today. But as we are headed out of the strife of World War II and into the second half of the 20th century, Auckland's urban environment was about to undergo another transformation. As we head into the 1950s, Auckland began to change rapidly as cars had become more affordable and were quickly becoming the dominant form of transportation. While trams had been the main transport mode for the previous few decades, development was mostly concentrated around the tram lines, as expanding to new areas was difficult without extending the tram network. With cars, development in areas without tram lines was much easier, and so with the change in priorities, the 1950s marked the beginning of rapid suburban expansion in Auckland, with the southern, western, and northern motorways being built during this period. While trams, which had once served as the pillar to Auckland's transport network in the first half of the century, and other popular transport modes like buses and trains, saw a decline in funding, with the once predominant tram network closing in 1956. With the outward expansion, new Auckland suburbs were built around ordered dependence, specifically East Auckland, which still doesn't have a tram line to this day, and the Auckland Harbour Bridge, which was opened in 1959 without designated walking or public transport links to the North Shore. It wasn't just transportation that changed during this period, the suburbs began changing too. Cul-de-sacs, which had actually emerged in the 1930s, began to pop up more and more in newly built suburbs, particularly in East Auckland, where suburbs like Northpark and Dannemora have one main road going through it before branching off into many cul-de-sacs. A big contrast to the mostly grid layout of the inner city, but I'll get to that later. It's interesting to see how city planning has changed over time, from dense developments in the 1900s to cul-de-sacs in the present day. But what are the positives of cul-de-sacs? The first positive of cul-de-sacs is they're often located in a quiet area of the city. Cities are well known for being fast-paced, and things can be stressful at times, with all the people around you and the constant movement of traffic. A cul-de-sac has less noise than a busy arterial or in a city street, simply down to the lack of vehicular access, which allows for someone to live at their own pace when they're at home. This can be good for someone who likes peace and quiet. Another positive of cul-de-sacs is that it allows a developer to build more homes. Due to the circular nature of cul-de-sac, there is more space for homes to be placed, which in turn allows for a small driveway with multiple houses attached to it. Cul-de-sacs are also cheaper to build compared to grid patterns, since less infrastructure like streetlights, roads, and footpaths need to be built. A third positive of cul-de-sacs is that they can be places for children to play. As traffic can only enter from one direction, the number of cars that are found in cul-de-sacs are low. Activities can include riding a bike or playing simple games. When I was learning to ride a bike, I did this on a cul-de-sac due to it being wider and the low volumes of traffic. If you like bikes, my next video will be on Auckland's bike network, so if you're interested in learning about it, hit the subscribe button down below to be notified when it's uploaded. From a quiet lifestyle to a play area, there are many reasons why a family or individual would prefer to live on a cul-de-sac. But what about the negatives of cul-de-sacs? Let's find out what they are. One negative of cul-de-sacs is their connectivity. As a cul-de-sac is a dead end, you can only exit it from one way, but that's for vehicular traffic. What about pedestrian or way? Not every cul-de-sac has a footpath that connects to other streets. Take Camerton Close in Northpark for example. This road is a cul-de-sac and is located only 62.6 metres away from Sherwood Crescent, according to GeoMaps. But when I look at the distance it takes to get there, it is 19 minutes by walking according to Google Maps. This is a common sight in cul-de-sacs that don't have pathways. Places that are close together often require a long detour to get there. Cul-de-sacs can also be far away from shops, schools and public transport in some areas, which contribute to car dependency. Take Sopolo Place for example, a cul-de-sac that is located in the North Shore suburb of Scapa Rock. If you wanted to get the closest bus stop from this point, it would take you 22 minutes by walking according to Google Maps. For comparison, it only takes 3 minutes by car to reach the same point. And as the bus route that this stop serves only has a 30-minute frequency during the day, it makes it undesirable to take public transport if you live in the area, as it takes 4 times as long to make the journey to Constellation Station on public transport compared to a car, and that's assuming nothing goes wrong. Because of this, nearly 80% of residents in Scapa Rock use motor vehicles to get to work, which is significantly higher than the Auckland region as a whole. I have made a video discussing traffic congestion and induced demand, which I've linked in the description if you're interested. A second negative of cul-de-sacs is the environmental impact from urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is suburban expansion of a city, with these new suburbs often being standalone houses and car dependent. I've already touched on the transport issues with urban sprawl in my first negative, so I'll focus on the other impacts. When cities build outwards, they often build over greenfield areas, which causes damage to ecological systems and extends the area of the city. Since 2000, a third of vegetable growing land in New Zealand has been lost to sprawl, with over 1 million birds being displaced and wetlands being drained in addition. As mentioned, people who live on cul-de-sacs are more likely to own cars, which increase carbon emissions through driving, and could potentially lock these emissions in for over a century. A third negative of cul-de-sacs is the increased cost for cities when building them. While cul-de-sacs are favoured by developers because they require less water pipes, streetlights, and roads compared to grid patterns as mentioned earlier, they increase the area of cities, and therefore result in higher infrastructure costs, more expensive houses, and a higher probability of crashes, with studies showing that car crashes that result in fatalities are 270% higher in newer cul-de-sac developments compared to older grid patterns. Basically, cul-de-sacs are cheap for developers in the short term, and are more expensive for cities and residents in the long term. Now for the big question. How does a suburb that was built nearly 100 years ago with a grid-like pattern compare to one that was built in the 1990s with cul-de-sacs? For this example, I'll be comparing the inner city suburb of Mount Eden to the eastern suburb of Northpark, located near Botany. In Mount Eden, a majority of its houses were built in the 1920s. While the suburb isn't exactly a rigid grid layout, it's mostly shaped like one, with many arterials going through it, including Balmoral Road, Dominion Road and Mount Eden Road, the latter two of which were home to Auckland tram lines. Although Mount Eden is a residential suburb, it has some nice parks, like Potters Parks, some mixed-use zoning around Dominion Road, one of Auckland's most well-known mountains in Mount Eden, and Eden Park, New Zealand's largest stadium. There are also cul-de-sacs in Mount Eden, although these ones are flat dead-end streets with no circle attached to it, a big contrast to the area I'm comparing it to. In Northpark, the urban environment is very different. While Mount Eden was developed in the 1920s, Northpark was developed in the 1990s, when there wasn't as much awareness on car dependency and urban sprawl compared to today. Northpark is also a residential suburb, like Mount Eden is. However, unlike Mount Eden's primarily grid-like layout, Northpark has a lot of winding roads and cul-de-sacs, with even the cul-de-sacs being different, with circular ends, and some even having a loop at the end. Northpark also has a small section of shops on the corner of Millhouse Road and Kilimanjaro Drive, which is standard in suburbs like these, and a small reserve in the north of the suburbs, which hosts sporting facilities and connects to a wider walkway. While Mount Eden and Northpark do contrast in suburban layout, both of these suburbs have been around for decades, and in Mount Eden's case, over a century. But what about a suburb that's been built recently? How does it compare to these examples? In the suburb of Ormiston in southeast Auckland, there's been significant development that has taken place since 2009, with the road layout incorporating some grids and not many cul-de-sacs. In fact, roads like Broadhurst Road and Donegal Park Drive actually used to be cul-de-sacs, but now they're through roads and they even intersect with each other. This is a contrast to nearby areas like Danenora, which have many cul-de-sacs and curvy roads. Now as for future developments, well, we don't know entirely. The future is unpredictable, but it is interesting to see that Ormiston has gone with the grid pattern. Is this the start of a new trend for Auckland? Only time will tell. Over our history, cities around the world have been constantly changing, and will continue to do so as we navigate complex problems like climate change and become more informed on sustainable living. This layout has had many social, economical and environmental impacts on Auckland. In my view, while cul-de-sacs can be great for someone who wants a quiet lifestyle away from the city, or for a developer who wants to build more family homes, they are very limited for future land uses, and they tend to be located in car-dependent areas, which bring with it many negative aspects of urban sprawl. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider giving it a like and subscribe. What do you think about cul-de-sacs? Do you think they're a good place to live, or is the distance from amenities an issue? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And as always, I'm Kiwi Planner, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.